The Nether, Minecraft's hell dimension, an ugly place with dangerous mobs and terrain, where one mistake or misplay could cost you your life and your gear. We all know what the Nether is, as it's required to beat the game. Besides that, the Nether is incredibly useful, from containing rarer items used to make powerful potions, to being used to create god tier farms which are jaw-droppingly efficient. And of course, we all know the infamous Nether highways which make travel around the world incredibly easy. But many people don't know its history, how it came to be. The fact that the first ever version of Hell, as it was known back then, was merely a weird version of the overworld. What many people also don't know is that when the Nether was first properly implemented, it wasn't nearly the same as the Nether we have today. The Nether has come a long way throughout its decade in the game. Today we're going to talk about its history, and more. So let's get right into it. To begin, we need to talk about when the Nether was first added or implemented. On January the 7th, 2010, over 11 years ago now, in-dev version 0.31.201.00.107 was released. Now for those of you who are unaware, in-dev versions are very old, bare bones versions of the game, which experimented with Minecraft survival elements and improved terrain generation for the first time since survival tests. Many features were added to these versions of the game, which would be the backbone for core gameplay in the future. But anyways, these versions of the game, as I mentioned, began experimenting with many features, some of which made it to the game, some of which were never seen again. In this specific in-dev version, level options were first added. Level options are a feature which were removed later in InfDev, but they gave players the ability to generate a world in a normal theme, a paradise theme which featured larger beaches and lots of flora, a wood theme which had lower light level and high tree density, and finally, a hell theme. The hell theme is what's most important for us here. The Hell theme was actually the first theme introduced besides normal, and it featured significantly less lighting during the day, allowing all mob types to spawn at any time. Almost all grass was replaced with dirt, making the terrain look ugly, and all water was replaced with lava, creating huge lava lakes and oceans. Sound familiar? Mushrooms were also far more abundant on the world's surface, and farming worked at a much slower rate, where crops only grew one stage every day. The world was dark, there was no day-night cycle, and it was basically night 24/7. And when I say dark, I really mean dark, as back in in-dev versions of the game, there was no brightness slider in the video settings, so nights were really dark and scary. Another interesting feature added in this in-dev update was the fact that fog became darker, and fog color was now based on how dark surroundings were. This in itself was the first ever version of the Nether, or as Notch envisioned it back then, Hell. And while it certainly looks different to the Nether we would come to know in the next few years, core features such as large lava lakes and dark spooky terrain would be very influential when the Nether would actually come to be. But as mentioned earlier, the map themes feature was later removed in InfDev versions, but Notch wasn't done with Hell yet. In fact, he had a lot of plans. But before we get into that, consider subscribing, as only a small percentage of you guys are actually subbed, and it really helps me out. No pressure though. As Minecraft Alpha continued development, Notch would frequently talk about his vision for the Minecraft Hell dimension, stating in a secret Saturday update on September the 18th, 2010, that the Hell biome will be used as an alternate fast travel dimension. He also references a book called Wheel of Time here, which I haven't read, but from what I gathered, features some form of fast travel dimension. Then, on October the 4th, 2010, Minecraft's Halloween update was first announced, where it was revealed that you would explore a new scary realm, a hellish world for fast traveling, that you portaled into. What's most interesting is that a main reason and main selling point for Notch adding the Hell biome was for this fast travel feature, rather than to just add a scary hellish dimension. The fast travel aspect seemed to be the main focus. With the new Hell biome announced to be releasing later that October, Notch continued giving spoilers and information, releasing the new soul sand textures on his Tumblr blog, a screenshot of the Nether and its terrain, and hinting at new mobs such as the Ghast. And then, on October the 29th, 2010, in one of his final blog posts before the Halloween update, Notch mentioned that he's still looking for a good new name for Hell, wanting to avoid using existing religious names as he wanted to be more creative and original. He considered both The Slip and Nexus, but neither felt Minecrafty enough. And then, on October 29th, 2010, the Hell biome was finally added in a special preview version of Alpha 1.2.0, sent only to two game journalists, PC Gamer and Indie Games. The Hell biome was referred to as the Slip in this version, and the Nether portal was referred to the Slipgate in a PC Gamer showcase video. On October the 30th, 2010, Minecraft Alpha version 1.2.0, the Halloween update, was finally released, the first public version with the Hell dimension, now called the Nether, as Notch believed it sounded more Minecrafty. The Nether, contrary to popular belief, is not another word for Hell, but rather it means situated down or below, potentially below the Earth's surface, sort of like an underworld. Now, the Nether back then was vastly different from the Nether we have today. It was extremely bare bones, featuring netherrack, soul sand, glowstone, gravel, some mushrooms, and that's about it. There were no other blocks. Alongside that, the terrain generated much more like islands, and it was common to see pretty interesting looking terrain. The only mobs which spawned were ghast, which were very buggy, and pigmen. That was it. Lava lakes were also much more sizable, making it difficult to navigate around, and of course, lava flowed much faster. So what were the main draws of the Nether then? Well, players went for 3 reasons. Number 1 was to see what it was like, as it's interesting, especially at first visit. Number 2 was to get glowstone, an awesome looking light source. And number 3 was for traveling efficiency, and to set up highways, utilizing the fact that for every 1 block in the Nether you traveled, 8 in the overworld. But not many players would have done this, as back in Alpha, people tend to build near their spawn. It also didn't work that well, as I discovered. When I went through a portal in the overworld and went back through the same portal in the Nether, it made a completely different one for me a few hundred blocks away for some reason. So during this time, the Nether was mainly seen as a cool little added feature to the game, which you would explore for a bit before not really returning that often. And for quite some time, the Nether remained untouched. The next update it would receive was many months later during May of 2011 in Beta 1.6, where beds would explode in the Nether if used, and portals were made to properly function in multiplayer servers. It wasn't until September of 2011 that we'd begin to see some attention from the developers again, with Jeb teasing screenshots of changes to Nether terrain generation and also the new Nether fortresses. And then, on November the 18th, 2011, with the release of Minecraft version 1.0.0, over a year after the Nether was first added, it finally received an update giving it more purpose. Nether fortresses were added, which contained blaze spawners, nether brick, and nether wart. Mobs such as the blaze and the magma cube were also added, and ghasts were made to drop ghast tiers, as well as zombie pigmen dropping gold nuggets. This update finally gave the Nether purpose, as you needed to go there to kill blazes to get blaze rods, so you could craft Eyes of Ender and find a stronghold. Also, if you wanted to brew potions, you would have to go to the Nether to collect nether wart and soul sand as well. Many potion ingredients such as ghast tears and magma cream also were only obtainable in the Nether, giving players even more reason to go there. The Nether was finally a dimension that wasn't just for show, no longer just a cool extra feature, but rather a dimension which contained some must-have items and resources. The Nether continued to be gradually updated over time. In version 1.3.1, released August of 2012, Nether wart was given the ability to grow in other dimensions aside from the Nether. 1.4.2, released not long after, also was quite an important update. Zombie pigmen were given the ability to wear armor, and the sword they held made them do more damage. A relatively unnoticed but very important change in this version of the game was also the implementation of the ability for mobs and entities to travel through nether portals, which would become very useful in later farm designs. In the same 1.4.2 update, wither skeletons were also added, giving the Nether another purpose to get wither skulls to spawn the wither, the boss which represents the Nether biome. Upon being killed, the wither would drop a nether star, a very valuable item used to craft beacons. Then, in version 1.5, released in March of 2013, nether quartz ore was added, generating in veins similar to ores such as coal. When gathered, it could be crafted into quartz blocks and other quartz variations, one of the nicest looking blocks in the game. Version 1.6.1, not too long after, also added chests in nether fortresses, making them contain more loot such as diamonds, gold, iron, and more. But with all these updates through 2012 and into early 2013, the Nether still really lacked something: variation. Yeah, sure, the Nether had some cool loot, mobs and blocks which you needed to get, but besides that, it was boringly similar, with the same netherrack and soul sand terrain generation all the time. It got very old very fast, especially for players who've been playing the game for quite some time. The fact that the Nether wouldn't receive any updates for 3 years after 1.6.1 also didn't help, as during that time period, players only became more and more familiar with the Nether's boring and repetitive generation. In 1.10, released in June of 2016, the Nether would finally get some small improvements, with Endermen given the ability to spawn there, magma blocks being added, and the red nether brick block being able to be crafted. It finally seemed that the developers were giving the dimension some much needed attention again, but that wouldn't last long, as the next update to the Nether wouldn't be until 1.13 in 2018. Over 2 years later, where vertical air cavities or ravines were able to generate in the Nether now, providing some much needed variation, but the Nether was still lacking. In fact, for the most part, the Nether looked almost identical in terms of block palette and terrain generation in 2010 as it did in 2019, and while the Nether did have more draws, it still really wasn't that much. 1.13 would mark the last update which changed the Nether until 1.16 would release 2 years later, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. So during this time period, the Nether was mostly used for a short list of very predictable things. Let me explain. Players would go there to get blaze rods to go to the end and maybe nether wart for potions. They would also probably go there to get quartz, glowstone or wither skulls. If you were to build there, it would likely be nether highways for transportation or to build blaze EXP farms. And that was it for the average player. Sure, you could build a cool lava base as well, but in terms of usefulness, that was all the nether really offered. For the more technologically advanced players, the nether was seen as no more than a convenience, as alongside its useful highways and transportation systems, the nether could be utilized to make extremely fast gold and EXP farms, as well as wither skull and ghast farms. And this led players to start asking for another update to make it more interesting, alongside the much wanted cave update. Unfortunately, their prayers were answered in version 1.16, the biggest update to the nether in 10 years. On June the 23rd, 2020, Minecraft version 1.16 was released, changing the nether forever. Named the Nether Update, it drastically changed terrain generation in the nether, making it feel almost as alive and interesting as the overworld. 4 new biomes were added to the nether, including the Crimson Forest, Warped Forest, Soul Sand Valley, and Basalt Deltas. The Crimson Forest, a very reddish biome with a floor coated in a new block called Crimson Nylium and Crimson Roots, contained a new form of netherwood called Crimson Stems, which were topped with netherwart blocks which acted as leaves. These trees also featured a new light source called Shroom Lights, which to me looked like a smoother version of glowstone. New vines called the Weeping Vine were also added, which hang from the new nether trees, and the Crimson Forest also spawned piglins and hoglins in higher frequencies. 2 new mobs added to the nether, which could be traded with and had unique attacks. And to top it off, a reddish fog gave the biome a very scary and intimidating atmosphere. Then there is the Warped Forest, a cyan version of the Crimson Forest which spawned endermen in higher frequency. The trees in the Warped Forest tend to grow higher, and they also contain these grim looking twisted vines. When in the biome, there is also a bluish fog which adds to the atmosphere. Next up is the Soul Sand Valley, which as its name suggests, are large valleys or stretches of soul sand, and a new block called Soul Soil, where ghasts and skeletons spawn in much higher frequency. They also contain blue fire known as soul fire, and protruding bone blocks from the ground, acting as fossils or ruins of other ancient beings. Finally, there are what I think is the most unique biome, Basalt Deltas. Making use of the new basalt and blackstone blocks, Basalt Deltas are like volcanic landscapes that are very mountainous, spiky and uneven, containing lava and magma in pools throughout. Due to this, they are likely the most dangerous biome to traverse in the nether, with the added danger of magma cubes spawning in a much higher frequency and being likely to knock players into lava. Now besides biome additions, 1.16 also added Bastion Remnants, large castle ruin type structures which can contain rare loot, mainly immense amounts of gold, but can also contain dangerous piglins and piglin brutes. Something unique to Bastions which is not seen in any other game generated structures in Minecraft is the fact that they can generate in 4 different forms: bridges, hoglin stables, housing units and treasure rooms, and each form of the Bastion has its own unique structures and loot. Ores such as nether gold ore and of course ancient debris were also added. Nether gold ore gave players another method of attaining gold through mining, and ancient debris, a block rarer than diamond, could be used to craft netherite and upgrade diamond armor to its netherite variant. This gave the nether a really important purpose, being the gateway to the only resource stronger than diamond, something which has been requested by players for years. Finally, unique nether ambience noises and tracks were added, which while often overlooked, give the nether a really scary and dark vibe, which is really well implemented. And I seriously mean this. Take some time to go to the nether with all of Minecraft's in-game sounds on, and you'll see just how immersive these ambience noises are. With all these great additions, players finally had more reason to go to the nether, but mainly the nether was finally becoming more interesting, containing a variation of biomes, terrain, blocks, structures and mobs, making it feel different and unique in every different world you explored it. The new nether gave players choice. They could either go exploring, mine gold, collect ancient debris, or raid bastion remnants. There are far more options than just a cookie cutter go to the nether, get blaze rods and maybe some quartz and glowstone, and then leave. Gone were the days of the boring generic nether, and now is the time of a nether worth exploring for more than just loot, but also for the thrill of the adventure, something it had been lacking for almost a decade. With that being said, I think that just about wraps up this video. We went through the evolution of the nether, from its initial hellish landscape in 2009 to its full dimension implementation in 2010, and then to its final much needed facelift and improvements in 2020. And I don't think this is the end either. Who knows what the future holds with this dangerous and hellish dimension? Only time will tell. If you enjoyed today's video, then consider subscribing and follow me on Twitter. Links are in the description. Thank you all so much for watching.